goddamn!" That was the first distorted scream, and possibly the last recorded words from a 911 emergency call. If you were the dispatcher on the other end of that line, what would you do when you don't know who is calling or where they are, whether it's an empty road, an open field, or a pitch-black forest where every sound is swallowed whole? The call came in the middle of the night while the city was asleep. No address, no coordinates, no visual reference, only rapid breathing, a trembling voice, and the sound of gunfire. Approximately 11 shots, firing in rapid succession, before the line went dead. That voice was later identified as Lorenzen Wright, a former NBA star, over 6'7", who once played under blinding arena lights in front of thousands of fans, earned millions through professional basketball. But more importantly, he was the father of 6 children, a son, a brother, a man with a family. That night, there were no stadium lights, no roaring crowd, no spotlight, only darkness, fear, and a forest, unnervingly silent, on the outskirts of Memphis. There's an old saying, when the forest goes quiet, the truth is often buried beneath it. Law enforcement logged the call, attempted to trace the brief signal, but could not pinpoint an exact location, could not reach the caller in time, and could not save the man, pleading for help in the dark. Hour after hour passed. The silence grew heavier, until days later, an entire city was forced to confront the possibility that the worst had already happened. And one cold question remains, haunting the case to this day. Why did a 911 call, a system designed to save lives, fail completely against a forest just minutes away from the city? Stay with us, because this call was only the beginning, before his name became tied to a broken 911 call and a desolate forest. Pause for a moment and ask yourself this: how does a man, once the pride of a city, recognized the moment he stepped outside, a man who lived under arena lights and national television cameras, simply vanish in a single night without leaving behind a clear trace? Lorenzen Wright was the embodiment of the American basketball dream, a former NBA player, selected 7th overall in the 1996 NBA draft by the Los Angeles Clippers, who went on to play 13 seasons for teams including the Atlanta Hawks and the Memphis Grizzlies, where he became a local hero in Memphis, Tennessee. Averaging 8 points and 6.4 rebounds per game, Lorenzen was more than a professional athlete. He was a devoted father to 6 children who came first after his retirement from the game. Born in Memphis, educated at Booker T. Washington High School, Lorenzen married Shara, his now ex-wife, in 1998. Together, they had 7 children, but the family endured an unspoken tragedy when their youngest daughter, Sierra Wright, passed away in 2003 from sudden infant death syndrome. The 6 surviving children, from his oldest son, Lorenzen Wright Jr., born in 1995, to his youngest daughter, Sophia, born in 2007, grew up under the bright yet heavy shadow of a famous father, many choosing paths in sports, education, or caregiving to carry forward his legacy. By 2010, Lorenzen was no longer just a former NBA star. He was the emotional and financial anchor for his children, having established life insurance trusts meant to secure their future, a detail that would later become central to years of legal disputes. And yet, on the night of July 18th, into the early hours of July 19th, 2010, Lorenzen left his ex-wife's home in Collierville, just outside Memphis, after what appeared to be a normal day spent with friends and family. He said he would be back, but he never was. No one believed that the final journey of a man who once commanded the spotlight could end quietly inside a forest with no lights, no witnesses, and a silence powerful enough to conceal the truth for days before Memphis was forced to confront an irreversible tragedy. A basketball spotlight can go dark in a single night, but the darkness of the forest never truly lets go. 9 days after the fatal 911 call, 9 long days, with no clear leads and no confirmed direction. On July 28, 2010, search teams finally made the decision to push deeper into an area that had largely been overlooked. It was a stretch of dense woodland, mixed with open fields, on the southeastern outskirts of Memphis, just minutes from the city center. The area sat near the exclusive TPC Southwind golf course, where luxury homes and manicured fairways projected an image of calm and affluence. But take a narrow turn onto Callis Cutoff Road, a little-known access path tucked between Pax Crossroad and Germantown, and the landscape changes immediately. Thick vegetation blocks out the light, shallow wetlands hold moisture in the ground, and the oppressive July heat of Tennessee hangs over everything like an invisible curtain. The air feels almost still. Sound is absorbed by the canopy of leaves, and any trace left behind is gradually erased by rain, insects, and wildlife. With the assistance of cadaver dogs trained to locate human remains, investigators finally found Lorenzen Wright. His body lay in a transition zone between open field and forest, severely decomposed after 9 days, exposed to the elements under temperatures exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit, intermittent rain, and the natural forces of the environment. Significant weight loss, a disturbed scene, and shell casings from multiple calibers scattered across the area made it extraordinarily difficult, almost impossible at that time, to accurately reconstruct what had happened. This forest, despite sitting so close to Memphis, the city where Lorenzen had once been a hero, was isolated enough to conceal a homicide for 9 full days without detection. Silent enough to reduce a man who once dominated under arena lights and the cheers of thousands into a name attached to an unresolved homicide. And it was this cold contrast between the immediacy of a vibrant city and the lethal isolation of the forest that forced investigators to stop, take a breath, and ask the questions that mattered most. Why did it take 9 days to find him? Who knew about Callis Cutoff Road, and who lured Lorenzen to this location on the night he disappeared? And more importantly, why did a father of 6, a former NBA star, a man who once had everything, have to meet his end in the heavy silence of nature? That question still hangs among the thick tree line, waiting for an answer. And perhaps that answer will lead us to something far darker. These are real cases, and every detail you hear is drawn from verified investigative records, after Lorenzen Wright's body was recovered on July 28, 2010, the greatest challenge for investigators was not a lack of determination, but the fact that this case contained nearly every element that makes a homicide investigation exceptionally difficult from the very beginning. The scene was located in dense woodland mixed with open fields near TPC South Wind and the narrow access road known as Callis Cutoff Road, an area with no nearby residences, little routine activity, and absolutely no surveillance cameras. There was no visual data to establish who brought Lorenzen there, how he arrived, or the exact time frame of the incident. The natural environment, thick vegetation, high humidity, and the oppressive July heat of Tennessee not only accelerated decomposition after 9 days of exposure, but also blurred the line between forensic evidence, such as shell casings from multiple calibers, and environmental disruption caused by rain, insects, and wildlife. Investigators were forced to operate in prolonged uncertainty, with reconstruction of events nearly impossible at that stage of the case. The 911 call, once believed to be the most critical lead, failed to provide the advantage investigators had hoped for. The brief call, placed from Lorenzen's phone and routed through the Germantown cell tower, captured only distorted shouting and the sound of gunfire, but due to internal delay, it was not escalated or acted upon immediately. Cell phone location technology in 2010 was limited, and without reliable GPS data, law enforcement could not narrow the search area in time across a vast natural landscape. There were no traffic cameras, no witnesses who saw Lorenzen with anyone after he left his ex-wife's home, forcing investigators back to traditional methods, relationship analysis, and personal association. At the center of that review was Shara Wright, his ex-wife, and the last person known to have seen him alive, particularly because she was connected to a $1 million life insurance policy established under their divorce agreement for their 6 children, with Shara serving as trustee. From a legal standpoint, however, potential motive, even one involving future financial disputes, does not equate to criminal guilt. Shara's statements shifted over time, but those inconsistencies were not sufficient to place her at the crime scene or to directly prove her participation. This became the central bottleneck of the investigation: strong suspicion without a closed chain of evidence, questions without answers capable of surviving judicial scrutiny. Every investigative avenue, no matter how carefully pursued, eventually reached its limit. As time passed and no new leads emerged, resources were redirected to more immediate cases. Public pressure diminished, and the Lorenzen Wright file was shelved, not because it had been solved, but because there was no clear path forward. If you were an investigator at that moment, which direction would you have pursued next? The case officially entered cold case status, where the truth does not disappear, but becomes trapped in silence until an unexpected statement from within the family shattered that stillness. From 2010 to 2017, the Lorenzen Wright case entered what investigators openly classify as a cold case, not because law enforcement stopped caring, but because every viable path had been tested and had ended in a dead end, leaving the file suspended between suspicion and institutional helplessness. On internal timeline charts, the years simply rolled forward, 2010 to 2011, then 2013, 2015, 2017, without a single meaningful breakthrough. For Lorenzen's family, especially his mother, Deborah Marion, each passing year deepened the sense that justice was being delayed. She appeared repeatedly in local and national media, applying pressure to police and prosecutors, insisting that the label "cold case" does not mean the truth has been found, only that the system has temporarily run out of tools. She refused to let her son's name fade into an archive or a forgotten case number. In stark contrast, life outside the case file continued in a way that unsettled the public. Shara Wright, the ex-wife, who had been among the early persons of interest, received a $1 million life insurance payout under the divorce agreement intended for their 6 children, with Shara acting as trustee. But within the first 10 months, nearly the entire amount, approximately $973,000, was spent on real estate, luxury vehicles, travel, and personal expenses, triggering prolonged legal action from Lorenzen's father, Herb Wright. In 2014, a court ordered the creation of a formal trust for the children, required Shara to account for expenditures, and ultimately, a confidential settlement transferred control of the trust to Herb Wright. What followed only deepened the unease. In 2015, Shara published a novel titled Mr. Tell Me Anything, an urban fiction work, whose narrative closely mirrored her real life, a towering NBA player portrayed as unfaithful, and a female protagonist trapped in a painful marriage. She wrote from the perspective of a grieving widow, depicting the killer as a faceless outsider, while the real case remained unsolved, and she herself was the last known person to see Lorenzen alive. The issue was never simply whether writing a book or spending money was legal. The issue was the cold paradox that someone so closely tied to the victim's final hours was publicly narrating his death as though it belonged to the past, while the truth remained beyond reach of investigators, and the family remained trapped in waiting. This prolonged silence created the most disturbing reality of any cold case, while the perpetrator, if one existed, could be living a new life, blending seamlessly into society. The truth remained buried beneath time, silence, and the limits of criminal investigation. Until, in 2017, an unexpected event shattered the frozen state of the case. Not from the forest where Lorenzen was found, but from a place far colder and far quieter, a statement from a family member already behind bars, leading investigators straight to the bottom of a lake. And it was there that the case turned in a direction no one had anticipated. 7 years of darkness did not kill the truth, it only forced it into hibernation, waiting for the moment to wake. Seen through the eyes of an investigator, 2017 was not an ordinary year. It was the moment professional instinct began to speak again, after 7 years of silence. The cold case file of Lorenzen Wright was pulled from storage not because of media pressure, but because something rare finally appeared. The one thing detectives wait for, and almost never get, a specific tip with a location, a physical object, and the potential to be independently verified from Jimmy Martin, a relative of Shara Wright. The investigation was forced to move away from the forest near Memphis, where every trace had long since died with time. If the truth still existed, it had to be where the perpetrators believed no one would ever look, a remote body of water in Walnut, General Mississippi, along County Road 302, roughly 50 miles from the original crime scene. Water, thick mud, and geographic distance had become the perfect allies of the crime. When dive teams were deployed in November 2017, this was no longer a routine search. It was an investigative gamble. If nothing was found, this lead would collapse, like every theory before it. But then, a 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol was pulled from the bottom of the lake, remarkably intact, after 7 years underwater. In that moment, the logic of the entire case shifted instantly. For the first time, law enforcement had independent physical evidence, not reliant on human memory, not vulnerable to emotion or conflicting statements. The firearm was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for forensic analysis, and it matched perfectly the 9mm shell casings scattered across the forest crime scene. From that gun, investigators began working backward, cross-referencing phone records, movement patterns, and names that had surfaced before but were never placed in the correct position. And it was here that Billy Ray Turner stepped out of the shadows, not as a familiar, violent offender, but as a quiet landscaper, a church deacon, a man shielded by a reputation of faith and trust within the community. To investigators, this is the most dangerous profile. Long-hidden crimes are rarely committed by obvious predators. They are often protected by normalcy and social credibility. When a church-going man, a gun at the bottom of a lake, and Lorenzen Wright's timeline were placed on the same analytical table, the picture became clear. This was not a random disappearance. It was a planned homicide, with concealment maintained through years of silence, until the very evidence meant to stay buried became the force that pulled the truth back to the surface. A gun can remain silent at the bottom of a lake for 7 years, but once it rises, every oath of silence collapses, and from that moment on, the case could never return to cold case status again. As the investigation entered its final phase, the picture surrounding Lorenzen Wright's death was no longer made up of scattered fragments. It came into focus as a structured criminal conspiracy with clearly defined roles, tightly connected through a single, central relationship. And it was the testimony from a relative of the ex-wife that ultimately exposed everything. Jimmy Martin, Shara Wright's cousin, already serving time for an unrelated homicide, was the first to break the silence. In 2017, he chose to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for full immunity in the Lorenzen Wright case. Martin's testimony, which spanned 2 full days during the 2022 trial, aligned precisely with the physical evidence, the firearm recovered from the bottom of the lake, the shell casings at the forest scene, and the phone records linking the timeline together. According to Martin, it was Shara Wright who recruited him, and Billy Ray Turner, a landscaper and church deacon whom Shara knew through church, to plan Lorenzen's murder. The motive, as outlined by prosecutors, centered on a $1 million life insurance policy intended for their 6 children, combined with long-standing post-divorce conflicts over money, control, and trust. Martin described 3 separate plots. In April 2010, at Lorenzen's condominium in Atlanta, Martin and Turner entered through a window, intentionally left unlocked by Shara, only to retreat after discovering Lorenzen was not home, and a stranger, later identified as Lorenzen's close friend, was asleep on the couch. In June 2010, at the former family home in Memphis, the plan was aborted again because another person was present. Then, on the night of July 18th, into the early hours of July 19th, 2010, the final plan was put into motion. Martin stated that Shara lured Lorenzen to a remote area near Callis Cutoff Road under the pretense of exchanging money or resolving a dispute. Turner, along with a teenager, identified only as Junior, lay in wait. Martin was not present at the scene, but testified that Shara later described what happened. According to her account, Lorenzen sensed danger, attempted to flee. They pursued him and fired multiple shots, approximately 11 rounds, from more than one firearm. Martin quoted Shara directly. "The plan worked. Lorenzen turned and ran. They chased him, shot him. He jumped the fence like a deer. They caught up, and he went down." After the killing, Martin testified that Shara summoned both him and Turner back to the area to clean up. They used a metal detector borrowed from Martin's mother to locate the dropped weapon, cut sections of fencing with bolt cutters, and discarded rags and barbed wire into trash containers. Martin later assisted Turner in disposing of the primary murder weapon by submerging it in a remote lake in Walnut, Mississippi, the same location he would eventually lead police to in 2017, resulting in the recovery of the key piece of evidence. These statements were further corroborated by testimony from Lorenzen's closest friends, individuals with intimate knowledge of his fractured marriage. Mike Gibson, a childhood friend who once lived with Lorenzen at the Atlanta condo, testified that Lorenzen no longer trusted Shara, that both parties had accused each other of infidelity, yet continued trying to co-parent their children. Phil Dotson, another close friend, recounted seeing Lorenzen for the last time on July 18th, 2010. After dinner, with fraternity brothers, and watching Lorenzen's son play basketball before Lorenzen returned to Shara's home in what appeared to be a normal and relaxed state of mind. Monte Nevels, another longtime friend, emphasized that Lorenzen was not the type of person involved in street life or drug activity, as some rumors suggested, but rather a gentle individual known for helping others. When these accounts were placed side by side, a consistent picture emerged. Lorenzen had walked into a trap he never anticipated, one set by the woman who had once been his wife, against the backdrop of a marriage destroyed by mistrust, infidelity, and financial conflict. From that moment forward, the 7-year structure of silence collapsed in a chain reaction. The case was no longer viewed as a random tragedy in the woods, but as a deliberate homicide with a direct shooter and accomplices tasked with concealment, each playing a defined role in the death of Lorenzen Wright. Love, once a bond, can become the sharpest blade, and when it cuts, nothing can undo the damage. In a premeditated case like this one, who do you believe bears the greatest responsibility? 7 years, 1 forest, and only one person who knew the truth until silence was no longer an option. After more than 12 years of investigation, controversy, and waiting, the case of Lorenzen Wright finally came to a close in a court of law. Justice did not arrive quickly, but when it did, every role was called by its proper name. The man who pulled the trigger, Billy Ray Turner, was sentenced in 2022 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The person who orchestrated the plan, Shara Wright, accepted a 30-year prison sentence in 2019 for facilitation of first-degree murder and was denied parole in 2022. The individual who helped conceal evidence, Jimmy Martin, received immunity in the Lorenzen Wright case, but will spend the rest of his life behind bars for a separate homicide. The verdicts closed the legal file, but they could not erase the years Lorenzen's family lost to silence. In this case, 3 words repeat themselves like an endless loop with no escape. Love, money, prison, love once began beautifully. 2 people who met in high school, married, had 7 children, and built a life around basketball and family. But that love slowly fractured under infidelity, mistrust, constant conflict, and the quiet trauma of losing their daughter, Sierra. Love was no longer a place of refuge. It became the source of jealousy, resentment, and ultimately, a deadly betrayal. Money, the invisible thread that pulled everything toward the edge. After the divorce, a $1 million life insurance policy became the center of every calculation. Money had once been the reward of an NBA career, but when it was spent and exhausted, it became a motive. An ex-wife willing to plan her husband's death to retain control. A lover willing to pull the trigger for the promise of a share. And then prison, the final cost, and the only outcome that could not be avoided. Shara Wright, 30 years, behind bars. Billy Ray Turner, life without parole. Jimmy Martin, a lifetime sentence for another crime. Prison does not only confine bodies, it imprisons the grief of 6 children who grew up without a father and a mother who lost her son forever. Love can be the most beautiful force, but when mixed with money and greed, it becomes the sharpest blade. And when that blade falls, the consequences are not just death, but decades of imprisonment, wounds that never heal, and a legacy forever stained before becoming a name in a homicide file. Lorenzen Wright was an NBA player, a son of Memphis, and above all, a father to children who were forced to grow up without him. His legacy does not live at a crime scene or in a sentence. It lives in the memory of family, friends, and a community that once called him their own. This case leaves one final question for the viewer. What do you think of the 30-year sentence given to Shara Wright? And do you believe justice in this case was truly complete? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you are drawn to real cases of disappearance and homicide that unfold in forests where the truth is often obscured by time and silence, consider following the channel as we continue to trace the files that refuse to stay buried.